a flat wooden board with the engraving of the alphabet, along with the numbers 0 to 9 and the words hello and goodbye. A plastic, small, heart-shaped object called a planchette. 2 or more people sit around this board, placing their fingertips lightly on the planchette. Someone poses a question and they all watch in shock as the planchette moves from letter to letter, spelling out responses seemingly on its own. Ouija boards. A portal to the underworld, or a useless board game? We were told from a young age to never play with a Ouija board in fear of conjuring nefarious spirits into our lives. Though, of course, if you were a rebellious child like me, you probably played this board game during a grade school sleepover. Tried communicating with the ghosts in your friend's house, ended up screaming when the planchette piece started moving a little bit, but was it really a spirit communicating with us? Was it one of our friends pranking us? Or are we subconsciously doing it? My name is Kayla and this is Cauldron Convos. Now let's dive into the cauldron and get into it, baby. And hell yeah, we got a smoke machine because it's Halloween, and why wouldn't I get a smoke machine, baby? I'm living out my childhood dreams. Think my mom's buying me a smoke machine? Hell no. You think I'm buying myself one? Hell yeah. Now in this week's podcast, we are going to go through a few important subsections of the Ouija board. We want to talk about the origin, the history, and the cultural significance of a Ouija board. We also want to get into some of the Ouija board stories, maybe infamous on the internet, as well as accounts that we can evaluate to see for ourselves, do we believe them, or is this bogus? Did I really say bogus?
Is it bogus?
We're also going to talk about what scientists have to say about Ouija boards, as well as a few other interesting things like, what demons will come to us if we use them, how should we use them, and other fun little facts about Ouija boards, so stay tuned, you don't want to miss it. Now, before we get into the history of the Ouija board, how it all started, how this satanic little slab of wood start, I just wanted to ask you guys to please consider subscribing to Love K-Ray, because here on Cauldron Convos, we post every single freaking week because we're passionate about the spooky conspiracy theories that you want to learn about. We want to educate, we want to entertain, and we want to make you laugh, as well as have a freaking smoke machine. Every subscriber really helps us spread the spooky word, so you know what? Hit that freaking subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds, but it really changes our lives, to be honest. It really does. I cry every time I get a subscriber. I shouldn't admit that to anyone, but I do. So the Ouija board actually came out of one of the most divisive movements of the 19th century. Spiritualism, which is based on the belief that departed souls can actually interact with the living, something I've been trying to tell literally everyone, but no one wants to believe me. Now, historians note that spiritualism started in the 1840s in a small town in upstate New York. Maggie and Kate Fox, famously known as the Fox sisters, claimed to be mediums, able to read mysterious knocks coming out from the deceased. And these girls actually started gaining popularity and embarked on a national tour to spread the word of the deceased they were communicating with. So they actually started hosting little shows in hotel rooms across major cities in New York, booking up one-on-one sessions in between their live studio 30 people plus sessions in a hotel room, which is kind of crazy to think about that this happened in the 1800s. And at the same time of these Fox sisters gaining popularity, Emanuel Swedenborg, a philosopher that believed spirits lived on Earth with us, started gaining steam as well. Okay, well, I think it's not helping at this point. Now, the Civil War started in 1861, about 20 years after the Fox sisters, which resulted in many husbands, fathers, and sons unfortunately dying. And so many people were desperate to speak to their beloved ones that by the end of the war, 11 million people were subscribing to the belief of spiritualism, and 35,000 people were practicing being a medium. So imagine that. The Fox sisters in 1840 were kind of the first ones to gain popularity for being mediums, and only 20 years later, there are 35,000 mediums. That's pretty crazy to think that that happened so quickly in such a little time. So as you can imagine, these mediums started getting creative. They started using talking boards, which were boards that allowed people to communicate with the deceased, and they started gaining a lot of popularity during this time. And in 1886, news reported the talking board craze as it was taking over spiritualist camps in Ohio. And in 1890, two men named William Fuld and Charles Kennard actually saw this as a business opportunity. They saw that the demand was rising for these talking boards, and they wanted to get in on it. I don't blame them. One of them was a coffin maker. Isn't that kind of crazy, though? That's how the Ouija board started, from a coffin maker. In 1891, they set out to get a patent for their invention on the board, and the sister-in-law of an investor was a medium, and she actually convinced a skeptical U.S. patent office for them of its legitimacy.
Yeah, they convinced the government that the Ouija board is real, which they must have done something that was probably pretty compelling. If you were to look at what the Ouija board is supposed to really do in its fundamental thing, it's supposed to answer questions that you're not supposed to know the answer to. And if it started answering questions about a loved one's dead relatives in the actual U.S. Patent Office, that'd be pretty impressive.
Now, by the early 1890s, 2,000 Ouija boards were already being sold a week. Now, that's pretty crazy to think about. And in 1891, the first advertisements started appearing in papers called Ouija, the Wonderful Talking Board, boomed a Pittsburgh toy and novelty shop describing a magical device that answered questions about the past, present, and future with marvelous accuracy, and promised never failing amusement and recreation for all classes. I love how they have to advertise as that. Like, it's not even subtle. It's just like, for all classes.
I think there's a lot more prevalent back in the day.
Yeah. Another advertisement in a New York newspaper declared it interesting and mysterious and testified as proven at patent office before it was allowed. Price $1.50. So they were advertising it as proven at the patent office. That's pretty crazy. They were using that as a way to convince people to purchase it. Now, another interesting point that I realized while researching the Ouija board is that the demand increases during times of uncertainty. So, for example, during the 1910s and the 1920s, with World War I and Prohibition, a surge in Ouija popularity was seen. Again, during the Vietnam War, Parker Brothers bought the Ouija board in 1966, and then in 1967, it outsold Monopoly, one of America's most famous game boards.
Yeah, I would say Monopoly is probably one of the most popular, but it's funny because you don't see themed Ouija boards like you do see, like, there's no Super Mario Ouija.
Nope, they only have glow in the dark, but I would love to see a themed Ouija board out there.
I was on Etsy and I found a Barbie themed Ouija board.
No.
Yeah, look at this thing.
I'll put a photo for all y'all.
And then there's also
listeners.
a lavender cat Ouija
Love
board.
It. Oh my god, it's beautiful. See, like, are people really scared to communicate with demons when they're using that? Imagine there's like a Barbie demon.
Yeah.
It's like, hello, I'm skinny. Now, another fun fact of the Ouija board is it was actually sold as something you would play on dates. So a lot of the early advertisements would show the board resting on a couple's knees as they sit across from each other, both of their hands on the planchette. Now, this was during a time where people of the opposite sex didn't really touch each other much unless they were married. But honestly, I don't even know if they touched each other much then.
Touching knees, you know. Whoa, they're touching knees. Holy smokes.
So men were apparently buying this for the ladies to be like, let's go. Let's do a Ouija board. Like Ouija board and chill. You know what I mean? Nope, Netflix. Let's Ouija board.
You should write that in your dating profile. Trying to Ouija
board and chill. And Norman Rockwell painted a man and a woman chairs pulled face to face playing with the Ouija board for the cover of the Saturday Evening Post in 1920. So it was so much in pop culture that Norman Rockwell painted this image of a couple, you know, sharing a great moment in front of a Ouija board. Essentially, it wasn't this demonic tool that we know of today.
Yeah, that came a lot later on in its life.
Exactly. So let's actually get into when did the Ouija board go from this innocent and actually sexual fun date game to a very sinister game that people believe can literally take over your life and your home. Well, after the Exorcist movie was released in 1973, things changed a bit for the Ouija board game. Hollywood depicted a Ouija board as what caused Reagan to be possessed by who?
Captain Howdy.
Captain Howdy. He got her through a Ouija board game, and that's kind of when it changed all of the public's views on Ouija boards.
Captain Howdy is Pazuzu, which is Zozo the demon.
Okay, yeah. And
So We'll go into that later.
Yeah. So while in previous Hollywood films and shows, the Ouija board was depicted more of a joking matter. So it would spell out funny things in the Ouija board. It would never spell out, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to eat you, I hate you, you suck. It would spell out things like, haha, or whatever. Just silly comedy. That's all the Ouija board was used in TV and films. The Exorcist changed the game. It laid the groundwork for other filmmakers and horror writers to use Ouija in their work. So after this pop culture phenomenon with, The Exorcist and other movies, religious groups actually started denouncing the Ouija board. In 2001, people started burning the board in bonfires alongside of Harry Potter novels. Now, this is not the first time religion has told people to stay away from Ouija boards. The Roman Catholic Church has been particularly critical of the Ouija board, dating back to 1919 when Pope Pius X warned the faithful to stay away from parlor games such as the Ouija board that are associated with the occult. Catholic.com, what a great domain. I wish I bought that.
In the 90s, you could extort them.
Calls the Ouija board far from harmless. And as recently as 2011, 700 Club Pat Robertson declared that demons can reach us through the board, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, so stay tuned. Now, the last thing about the pop cultural phenomenon of Ouija boards that I want to mention is the 2014 movie Ouija did so well at the box office that Ouija 2 came out in 2016, and the movie dramatically boosted board sales that petitions by evangelical Christian groups to ban the Ouija started popping up again, which is kind of funny that a movie can drive the sales of a game, and, we got the groups just wanting to protest it because of it. Now, we'll get into Ouija board true stories and we'll get into the science of the Ouija boards in a little bit, but we want to focus a few minutes on the demons of Ouija boards just so you don't come by them.
So the first main account of a demon coming out of the Ouija board comes from the late 1940s when a 14-year-old Ronald Doe was using a Ouija board alone when the planchette suddenly began moving in the figure 8 position, and then it suddenly went from the letter Z, O, Z, O, Z, O. And this is a sign of Zozo the demon, also known as Pazuzu. Zozo was one of many fallen angels from heaven that was exiled by God. Zozo and the possession were written about in the so-called Exorcist book under the name Pazuzu, which inspired the modern version of Pazuzu, which originally comes from Babylonian culture. Zozo is a particularly horrific demon who wishes death upon board users. He is cruel and sadistic, preying on people's insecurities and fears, often will pose as up to 3 spirits of loved ones. He's brutally misogynistic and loves telling board users that he hopes that they die soon. Oftentimes, he'll pretend to be multiple spirits at once to further confuse people. He will also add confusing scenarios by stating that he is a little boy ghost and that he is afraid of the malevolent spirit haunting this place. Zozo loves watching his victims squirm in confusion and oftentimes takes pleasure in gullible humans believing his lies. In 1951, Ronald Doe was a boy who got possessed by Zozo. After using the Ouija board, he was eventually exorcised after a violent process by priests. In 1972, in Los Angeles, a mother named Doris Bither used a Ouija board and found herself haunted by the dark entity which sought her and her family harm. In 1977 to 1979, the Enfield poltergeist was supposedly plagued by that malevolent force, Zozo, which is interesting because we spoke about that in our Exorcist podcast.
Another thing is Zozo will go back and forth really quickly with the planchette. It'll go kind of crazy. It might even spell out his name, Z-O-Z-O.
It goes in a figure 8 as well.
It goes in a figure 8. So if those are happening, please close out the board and just throw it away, honestly. Burn it, maybe. I want to talk about some famous internet stories that I found about Ouija boards. So specifically, I looked at Reddit's most famous posts about Ouija boards, and I found one that's pretty quick, so let's just get into it. I always thought these things were BS. However, years ago, this changed when I did it once with some random people at a get-together. We were talking to all sorts of different spirits, and I wasn't taking any of it seriously. But then I thought of a way to put this to the test. I'm Kuwaiti American and was born in Kuwait, so I know Arabic and knew of a friend of my brother that passed away recently. So I asked to speak with him. Now, only one person knew me at the get-together, and even then didn't know that much about me. I was definitely the only one who could speak Arabic. I was in Oklahoma at the time. So I asked in Arabic how he died. The board spelled out car crash. I was a bit shocked, but still didn't buy it completely. So I asked a more detailed question. I asked in Arabic, how old was he when he died? It pointed me to 1 and then a 3. And that's when I started really freaking out. No one would have ever known these details, let alone understand what I was even asking. I asked for more details on the crash. He flew out of the sunroof, and after that, I stopped.
I hate just thinking about that. I would be so scared.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
I know, exactly. So that's like just one account of the many on Reddit where people are talking about their experiences with Ouija boards, and that, some of these people actually don't even believe in any of this spiritual stuff or paranormal stuff at all. Like, they have nothing to do with it, but for some reason they have, dabbled in it, and the time that they did, they're like, I will never touch that again.
Yeah, I think that is the case with a lot of people that use Ouija boards.
Pretty crazy. A couple years ago, I lived on campus at SUNY New Paltz in New York, and my dorm mates had never used a Ouija board. So one night in October, I brought out mine. New Paltz is a pretty old town, and one particular area, Huguenot Street, is now a historic site as it was settled in the mid-late 1600s. So the 5 of us put our hands on the planchette, and I started out by saying some spiel like, we consciously call out to any benevolent spirits that would also like to communicate with us. New Paltz Town, the college campus, Huguenot Street. As soon as I said Huguenot Street, the planchette came to life under our hands. Yes. What is your name? Adam. How old are you? 8. What years did you live? 1829, 1837. Then we asked him a question that required more than a short answer. I forget what exactly. He started picking out letters. J, E, S, U. And I started thinking, oh, this spirit is going on about Jesus. But as he continued, I was shocked. Je suis. He was speaking French to us. This makes complete sense because founding families of Huguenot Street were French. Yet it came as quite a shock to realize the reality of the situation through the Ouija board. I should mention that I was the only one out of all of us that knew any French. So from this point until the end of the session, I kept my eyes on the ceiling to prove to the others that none of us could be controlling the planchette. You really got the impression of a child through the spirit's energy and playfulness. It really felt like we were speaking with a child. He sometimes spoke English, but mostly French. We spoke English to him, though. It was a bit weird thinking about the possibility of a language barrier between our realm and his. He told us that his father was a doctor, that he had a dog named Henry, who he loved very dearly, and some other kid stuff. We asked him if he had lived on Huguenot Street. Yes. Where? White Fort. We all shrugged because none of us knew Huguenot Street extremely well. There were about a dozen founding families and a whole bunch of old buildings in that area. Tough questions, but we had to ask. If you don't mind us telling us, Adam, how did you pass away at such a young age? He responded in French as I stared at the ceiling and my friends announced the letters. La guerre me détruit. La guerre me détruit. The war destroyed me. Chills, all of us. Whoa. That was a huge moment for us all when I translated what he said. We also asked, are you at rest in the Huguenot Street Cemetery? He confirmed that he was, and that his headstone was near a tree. Eventually, the session began winding down, and the planchette moved more and more sluggishly. We had to say goodbye. It was heartwarming to talk to such a young and happy-seeming spirit, yet obviously gave us a huge case of the willies also. He gave us a lot of information. We had to look into it. A few days later, we paid a visit to Huguenot Street. It was a day or two before Halloween, and the tour guides that work at the historic site have all this special stuff around that time. That particular evening, every path was lined with lit candles, which just added to the whole experience. We wandered down the street and stumbled upon Dubois Fort. It was indeed a white building, and the only building which called itself a fort on the whole of Huguenot Street. Naturally, we had to go in. The inside was clearly very old, but renovated into a tour type of place. There were signs with information about particular things in the house. There were display cases of Native American arrowheads found in the area. One of the signs read something to the effect of, Dubois Fort went under major renovations in 1837. This was the year Adam reported to have died, in the midst of some war with the Native Americans. The facts lined up so well. It's incredible. Could he be Adam Dubois, descended from one of the founding families? Finally, we paid a respectful visit to the Huguenot Street Cemetery. It's so old that it's actually now referred to as a burial ground. There are old, weathered, discolored, slanting headstones covering this place. We started looking around for smaller ones because we figured that children would have correspondingly small headstones. Though the vast majority of the stones are too weathered to make out the words that were on them, there are a few in particular we suspected to be his. Small ones near trees, near other members of the Dubois family, and even one small headstone bore the initials AD. We paid our respects and left. To this day, this is the most gratifying Ouija board experience I've had. I would like to contact him again. I hope he is at peace.
Just drop the microphone. Holy smokes. That is terrifying.
Yeah, I feel like those are very specific, like numbers, dates, time, like speaking French. That's all very specific.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's still on Reddit, so you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Exactly.
But, I mean, I think that's incredible.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're wondering, oh, I want to use a Ouija board, I'm not recommending it. But for people that want to, and they're like, I don't care if you recommend it or don't recommend it, these are some recommendations that I found online by witches that use Ouija boards kind of religiously. Now, they specify to use a wooden board or something more authentic than a glow-in-the-dark, and as you said, like a Star Wars or
Like
a Harry Potter
just the Hasbro
themed.
ones. Like, we were at Target today, and I saw a Ouija board. I'm like, oh, no.
I didn't see that. I would have bought it.
Oh, why? I don't want that.
I want it. Some people say that if you are in a pair, for the person with their fingers on the planchette to be blindfolded so they can't kind of see and control where the letters, what letters it hits. Protect yourself before you start by cleansing your board and your planchette. You can use herbs, you can use oil, smoke, etc. Use a quiet space. You can even light candles if you want. And make sure to close out the board to make sure the spirits don't leak out of the board and ruin your life. Set your intentions. Make sure you say, only good spirits come. Those kind of lines. Now, unlike the spiritualists, scientists say that Ouija boards are actually not powered by the paranormal, but are powered by us. Though, note, we sometimes aren't doing it on purpose or controlling it to prank our friends. It doesn't really feel like we're moving it at all, but we might be moving it kind of subconsciously. Now, psychologists point out that it's because of the idiometer effect. Now, the idiometer effect is a psychological phenomenon wherein a subject makes motions unconsciously. In 1852, physician and physiologist William Benjamin Carpenter published a report for the Royal Institution of Great Britain examining these automatic muscular movements that take place without the conscious will or volition of the individual. For example, think crying in reaction to a film or hypnosis. Now, this kind of started a chain of other scientists wanting to study this effect, the idiometer effect. In 1853, chemist and physicist Michael Faraday, intrigued by table turning, conducted a series of experiments that proved to him, though not to most spiritualists, that the table's motions was due to the idiomotor actions of the participants, not by magic or paranormal. Dr. Chris French at University of London explained it can generate a very strong impression that the movement is being caused by some outside agency, but it's not. Other devices such as dowsing rods or more recently the fake bomb detection kits that deceive scores of international governments and armed services work on the same principles of non-conscious movements. The thing about all these mechanisms we're talking about, dowsing rods, Ouija boards, etc., they're all devices whereby a quite small muscular movement can cause quite a large effect. He's claiming that planchettes in particular are kind of designed to be this small, lightweight object that can be moved by such small muscular movements. He noted that with Ouija, not only does the individual give up some conscious control to participate, so it can't be me, people think, but also in a group, no one person can take credit for the planchette's movements, making it seem like the answers must be coming from an otherworldly source. Moreover, in most situations, there is an expectation or suggestion that the board is somehow mystical or magical. Once the idea has been implanted there, there's almost a readiness to happen. Now, it's interesting because researchers at the University of British Columbia's Visual Cognition Lab thought a Ouija board can be used to see how human minds process information, specifically conscious versus unconscious thoughts. Dr. Ron Rensink and Dr. Sidney Fells studied what happened when people use Ouija boards. Now, participants in their study were told that they were playing with a person in another room via teleconferencing. The robot, they were told, mimicked the movements of the other person. In actuality, the robot's movements simply amplified the participant's motions, and the person in the other room was just a ruse, a way to get the participant to think they weren't in control. Then participants were asked a series of yes or no fact-based questions. For example, is Buenos Aires the capital of Brazil, where the 2000 Olympic Games held in Sydney? And it expected to use the Ouija board to answer. When participants were asked verbally to guess the answers to the best of their ability, they were right only around 50% of the time, a typical result for guessing. But when they answered using the board, believing that the answers were coming from someone else, they answered correctly upwards of 65% of the time, concluding that one's subconscious is seemingly smarter than one's conscious.
I think if you hear something once, your brain can maintain it to some capacity. It's like some people get hit in the head and they can speak a different language. I don't know how legit that is. I've heard of that before online. But I think it would be interesting to take Alzheimer's patients, because I think what drives the subconscious in this situation is the hippocampus and the anterior cortex, which are the two main parts of the brain that are affected by Alzheimer's. If you were to have Alzheimer's patients willingly partake, I mean, I guess they couldn't really willingly partake in a Ouija board, but just to see what would happen.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because, for example, if there are two or more systems of information processes, which system is more impacted by neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's? If it is impacted the non-conscious earlier, Rensink hypothesizes indications of the illness could show up in Ouija manipulation, like you said, possibly even before being detected in conscious thought. However, they're trying to get funding for this, but some people think it's a little bit kind of out there to be using Ouija boards as a way to test Alzheimer's patients, so they don't want to fund it. However, they are crowdfunding it, and I don't know the status of it, but I'm going to look into that.
Big pharma, man. They don't want to spend any money at Target
Ouija
buying
boards.
Ouija boards, $20 Ouija boards.
I hate that about them. So there are more scientific studies using Ouija board, but I also want to get into kind of, recent stories about what's happening with Ouija boards, which is pretty interesting. The largest outbreak of illness attributed to a Ouija board actually took place between October, how funny, it's always in October, 2006 and June 2007 at a girls-only Catholic boarding school near Mexico City. Students at the Girls Town School reported a variety of symptoms, including headaches and difficulty walking, and some students could only walk with the help of their friends. Symptoms would suddenly go away and just as suddenly recur. Of a student population of 4,512 were affected. And Mexican psychiatrist Nashiela Loa Zavala investigated the outbreak and diagnosed it as a mass case of psychogenic illness, aka mass hysteria, which is funny because we talked about that in a little bit in the Salem witch trials video. So why is mass hysteria such a big thing? But whatever, go watch that video if you are interested in mass hysteria. But she traced it back to a student who had used a Ouija board to try to influence the outcome of a school basketball game. I love that. That's what it's about. This is like High School Musical, but like remix horror movie.
This will be the next Disney Channel musical.
Ouija board, it's our vacation. Writing in the 2010 issue of the International Journal of Psychoanalysis, she noted that the accused girl, Maria, was actually expelled for using the board. But before leaving, she was reported to have cursed the school. She was like, I ain't gonna be the only one going down. I'm taking the whole damn school with me. And she was like,
now,
left.
Is the school okay?
Soon after the symptoms appeared, a belief in the reality of demons and spirits, the involvement of the Ouija board, and rumors that Maria's mother was a witch appear to have generated extreme stress. Dr. Zavala observed that even before the outbreak, the school was a hotbed of tension as it was operated under strict rules where even minor infractions could result in dismissal. The first few victims of the strange malady only affected Maria's fellow Ouija board players, but soon spread across the school. Now, is this a case of mass hysteria, or is it really like a demon infiltrating this random school in the middle of nowhere? I guess we'll never know. It's something where I want to believe a Ouija board exists. I know that's kind of dark, but I want to believe that something like this exists, something other than what I can see, something bigger than us. However, for some reason, there's no video evidence of a Ouija board, or there's no video evidence of someone using a Ouija board, at least blindfolded especially.
Well, there's so many garbage videos on YouTube. Every big YouTuber ever has done a Ouija board video, but they're all so fake.
for me personally, I believe in ghosts. Therefore, I think I believe in Ouija boards. Like, I believe that if there are ghosts, then ghosts would communicate with us.
Yeah, I just think the origins of the Ouija board come from a money-making perspective. The women that invented it, more or less, the spirit talking board, were just trying to sell tickets.
Yeah, definitely. And
So-
then it peaked. And then obviously people are going to want to buy them if they are in a time where a lot of people are dying during war and uncertain times.
Then
So
they were
I
bought by
understand that.
Hasbro.
Yeah.
And now you can get it at Target. So.
Exactly.
And Amazon.
So Park Brothers owned Ouija in 1991, and later on Hasbro, the world's famous game owner toy company, actually bought Parker Brothers. So as a result, Hasbro now owns Ouija. So I actually heard two different stories of how Ouija got its name. One of the ways I heard it was that it's an ancient Egyptian word meaning good luck, and that the investor's sister-in-law, who kind of went to the patent office, made up this name because she said that it spelled it out for her. But I also heard that the name got its name because it's a combination of two words, both meaning yes, aka oui, and ja in German, meaning yes, that it's like a double yes, like yes, yes. That's kind of creepy, but that's the two ways that I've heard it's got its name.
I think there's a lot of damning evidence that shows that Ouija boards are real. I don't know. It's real enough for me not to want to try it.
True.
But I think there's a lot of psychosomatic science behind that it could possibly not be
True,
real. But
true.
I'm too scared to figure that out on my own.
True, but maybe we will if we hit 10,000 subscribers. If you like this podcast, make sure to give it a thumbs up on YouTube or the audio format on whatever podcast streaming service you're using. Like, comment any feedback or advice, subscribe, leave a review, whatever you want to do. But we appreciate you being here, so thank you guys so much. Happy spooky season, and I'm glad you're here with us. And I'll see you guys next week here on Cauldron Convos. Bye, babies. Mwah. Woo! Spooky.